So I'm Melissa Bank, and I asked Debbie Siegel to interview me, which sounds really funny. Like, I just wanted to be interviewed, so I asked her to interview me because she's been in my class, and I've known her for a long time, and I think of her as a really good writer and very simpatico. I felt like I could look at Debbie's face and just get comfort from that. But I think probably also one of the reasons why I think she's simpatico is because she's as nervous as I am in situations like this. So maybe it's not ideal.
Well, I have known you since I think you started teaching at the conference. I was a coordinator here, and I never had the workshops during that time. So I've watched you and enjoyed hearing you read, and also known that everyone that took your workshop felt really nurtured. And actually, that's something that was the first thing a fellow workshopper here now said to me about you, was that you appeared to be so nurturing. And I wonder how you feel about your role as a workshop leader in that sense.
You know, I do actually feel like my job is to nurture young writers, and I think partly it's that you know, it's such a lonely life in some ways, being a writer, and you do this thing in a room by yourself for a long time, and you might be the only person who cares that you do it. You know, everybody else in your life might rather you do something else. Like, your husband might really like you to put a little time into dinner, or, you know, your boss at work might really appreciate if you did some overtime. And so it's something that you just generally do by yourself, for yourself, and it's hard to keep going. I mean, I think it's sort of an endurance test. I think sometimes writing has less to do with talent than endurance, because there are plenty of talented people out there, but you almost have to develop a stomach for rejection, and you have to be pretty good at failing, because that's part of it. It's just part of it. It's as much a part of it as, you know, boxing is to a boxer. You know, you take a lot of punches, and the people who survive in the end, I think, are the people who just keep getting up. But I feel like it sort of, you know, I feel like it's nice to have all those people who do this thing alone in a room together, and I think you can sort of create an ideal community in that way. You sort of set up rules of how students behave together, and you just try to be the teacher you wish you'd had.
Well, actually, what you wrote, and what you read at the reading was just, it was two pieces of nonfiction, and one of them was about the time before you were an established writer, and the writer was writing in a vacuum and failing, isolated, and it seemed she was isolated from the people in the world around her, but by the end of the piece, she rides her bike through the brutal New York City cold, and is triumphant in her place.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So did you choose that? I thought that struck me as that was a great piece for writers in that room.
Yeah, I actually felt pretty insecure about all of these nonfiction pieces. I'm not really sure what I think of them yet. But I thought if anybody would be interested in it, it'd probably be this crowd. I think it probably also just is important for writers to understand how long it can take, and to sort of show them that I was, you know, and am where they are.
Well, you said that when you sit down to write something new, you sit down as a beginning writer. I think
Yeah.
you said that. And can you tell, does that change as you write through the piece?
Yeah, but it doesn't change. I mean, once I'm into a piece, then I feel like that piece dictates its own rules. And what happens is I'm not thinking about myself anymore and how much I know or how much I don't know. I'm just trying to get a clear, get into that other world. And really, it's so much of it is really about, it's really about losing your self-consciousness. And really that's a really big part of starting for me, because I think like some of the other writers here who teach, you know, I've been published and I was really lucky, and that meant getting a lot of attention from the press and media, whatever. And the normal thing, the thing that makes the most sense after you get that kind of attention is, once you realize how much you're exposing yourself, is then to try to control how you're exposed next time. It never really occurred to me that people would say, is that you? Are you like this character? Or how autobiographical? I don't know why. It just didn't occur to me. I didn't know that anybody would think that was me, just because all of the autobiographical details are identical. So I think the natural thing is, when you go out the next time, you want, you know, it's a survival thing. You want to make sure that you come across as, you know, controlled and smart and blah, blah, blah. And the fact is that I've never written anything worth reading while I've tried to control it. You know, you can only really come up with things that have been written before, meaning, you know, the part of you that actually comes up with anything worth reading is the part of you that's really not the part of you that's unattached to your superego, and is just envisioning someplace. And what makes you go into that place, or not what makes you go into that place, but it's really like you're trying to get to that world so you don't have to think about yourself anymore. And once I'm in, I don't feel like, oh, I know this, I remember this. You know, I still feel like I'm a total novice, but I'm paying attention to what the story is telling me.
So you're not conscious of what is the world going to think of me?
No, I don't care about it.
And actually getting published kind of impose that on you in a way, because people think it's you?
Well, you know, I have a real tendency toward writer's block anyway. Mm-hmm. So I would say that what might have blocked me was the idea that I wasn't a good writer. No one liked anything I wrote before I was published. Or I think what being published did was it made me more self-conscious and a little more fearful. And it's hard to fool yourself into going back into that cave of just being, you know, completely unself-conscious and being in that world.
You've stopped for now writing fiction, and you're writing nonfiction. So that sounds like you're sort of confronting that a little bit, because now you're actually, I don't know what you say, you might not publish it, but.
I mean, the weirdest thing about it is that I think I had a lot of trouble, because I felt like, not a lot of trouble, but I felt like I'd really exposed myself. Mm-hmm. And and that was kind of hard. And so it seemed that the answer would be to really expose myself in autobiography or something. I mean, it's a sort of ridiculous step. The thing is, I honestly didn't feel like what I was writing when I was trying to write fiction after my second book, I didn't really feel like anything that I was writing had to be written. It seemed like, I think you probably see this in a lot in conferences. Mm-hmm. You know, somebody might as well be just writing over and over again. I really want to be a writer, but I don't know what to write. And that's what those attempts are. And I felt that way too. I mean, I just wanted to write, but I didn't feel like what I was coming up with was important and necessary, and it seemed like somebody else could write it. And one of the ways that I have gotten myself sort of past the part of writer's block that says you you don't know anything, is to say, you're the only one who can write this story. You know everything you need to know. Because, and when I'm doing that, I can feel like someone out there may have this issue, or if it is sort of, that's what feels important, is sort of writing something that only you can write.
And do you sit down every day, even if you're feeling the block, or do you stay away from writing altogether?
I vary it. Yeah, I vary it. I mean, a lot of times I will forbid myself to sit down at the desk if I've had a really bad run, because I kind of just need to forget about that. But I spend an enormous amount of time trying to write, and I spend a lot of time outside of the story. So I'm not, I'm basically the opposite of a fluent writer.
What do you mean by outside of the story? I'm not sure.
I may have an idea of what I want a story to be about,
right.
but I don't know how to get into it. I don't know where it starts. I don't have the voice. And by voice, it's not a simple thing. It's sort of like, I don't know my narrator's attitude toward the material she's describing. She, confiding, or is it sort of her subconscious speaking? I'm saying her because it's always a her. And so I'm trying to find the language that will basically make it possible for me to be inside the world of the story. And it's sort of, when I was sort of talking about the cave before, it is this place where you stop being, it's a place of kind of no ego. When I'm writing well, I don't feel like it's me writing. I mean, I know a lot of writers say that, but it's really true. And so the lines you come up with are really, surprising. And I'll actually, when I finish a day of writing, I'll actually call somebody, not so much now because I feel more insecure, but I used to. Sometimes I would call a friend and say, like, you have got to hear this. And I would, repeat an exchange of dialogue, because it didn't feel like, hear this great thing I did. It just sort of feels like it sort of happened, and I was like the lucky recipient.
I can see emerging from writing, if I were emerging from what you had, put out there that day and wanting to read it to someone.
Yeah.
The hard work, it sounds like, is getting to that place where it will...
where it doesn't feel like it's
write.
mine anymore.
Right, where it doesn't...
Yeah.
But it's your it's you...
Yeah.
Without the control. So
yeah.
Okay. Something that the voice in your writing, I want to ask you about. I also want to ask you about what you said about it's always a her. It's okay that it's always a she, but has it ever? Do you?
I have tried.
Have that?
I mean, I think of that as sort of a limitation. I have written stories from the male point of view, but I don't think they're so good. And I'm really. I mean, I would, as you know, I'm writing autobiographical nonfiction, so this wouldn't be the time to try out a male perspective. But, I like the idea that I would be able to move on. One of the things that's hard about moving on after you've published a book that's gotten some attention is and attention that you didn't necessarily, I mean, I'm speaking now, being called a chicklet author. Just something you just never, I mean, I just never thought of that. And the idea, I never even thought of myself as single, And so, I mean, I didn't, whether I was with somebody or not, I wouldn't have said that about myself. It wasn't like didn't feel like it defined me. I've never been like somebody who went out on a lot of dates or whatever. But I think I would have called myself maybe a weirdo or a little bit of a hermit. But so sort of I was, for a period of time, identified as, a single woman writing about single women. And and I sure didn't want that to stick. And on the other hand, you know, you don't really have that much control over what you write or what interests you. Or I don't, anyway. I mean, I really, the writing that I do is really important to me, and I couldn't just write from a different point of view or different, you know. I also think, like, you never would respond to your critics or how you want to be viewed. That's not what writing is about.
Well, if it helps any at all, on the flip side of that coin, is that I think now women, unmarried women by choice, or even not by choice, just by, I mean, it's not a conscious choice necessarily, it's just accepting oneself as, that's actually become so much more acceptable, and I think it's really important. Your writing maybe was at a moment when the society was ready to define it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of came as a revelation. It coincided with this revelation that there were many single women in their 30s and 40s, and I don't have a problem even with that. I think I didn't like being called something, but I couldn't necessarily write something that would contradict that, because I don't have that in me. I think the thing you really just have to do as a writer is forget about that stuff, and I benefited from it as much as I, might not have liked that label, in that, I don't have a day job anymore, and, I was lucky.
Was it difficult before Girls Guide was published at that point? Was it difficult for you to get published?
Yes. I mean, I was just rejected everywhere, from the New Yorker to Hog Patch Review. Everyone. When you're rejected everywhere and all the time, you have to develop your own system of judgment about your work, and not give other people that power. Because if all you're getting is rejected, then if you say, well, they must be right, I'm garbage, you can't write anymore. So, I mean, I would get rejected, it would feel bad, but I would think, that actually is not your strongest story, or you never really like that ending anyway. And so when I did have success and read nice reviews, I wasn't vulnerable the way I might have been. I didn't turn my head.
You mentioned that you do have an MFA degree.
Yeah.
So, how do you think that helped you, or did it help you? Did it help your writing? Did it help prepare you for rejection, or feeling like you were part of a society of writers?
I did kind of feel like I was. I did have friends who were writers. That was nice. I think it helped me in that, you really can learn an awful lot about craft in a short period of time. And actually, that's what I say to my class now. Like, I'm going to just try to tell you everything it's taken me, 25 years to learn. You can save a lot of time that way. I feel like I learned how to be an editor. I think that it made me maybe hungrier for getting published for a while, because I think you want, you don't really get the validation that you want in a workshop most of the time. Don't you really want someone, someone to say, that was really good. You're a good writer. Nobody ever says anything like that. And I think you're kind of dying to hear it, or dying for that affirmation. You learn how to make your work sound more polished and more professional. But I think you give up something of the artist in that. And you have to be, I feel like I kind of had to unlearn a lot of stuff about craft in order to, I think you have to make a big mess, and you have to, like, humiliate yourself, and you have to be willing to seem like an idiot or sound like an idiot or just to do anything new. And when you're trying to get published, you're just trying to sound the way you think writing sounds or something. You know, you're trying to see your own words in the New Yorker font. And what that generally means is being really conservative about your work. It's really just trying to do what's come before you.
Was it hard for you to allow your voice to come out in your writing, to kind of, let's see, allow yourself to write in your voice? Because it does feel like you got there and it's vulnerable to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like, first of all, I feel like it took me many, many years to reach that point. And the way it happened was I began to write a story that was different from anything I'd ever written before. It turned into the story that I think was called My Old Man in my first book. And it made me nervous. I mean, I can still remember just like looking at that paragraph and just suddenly feeling, you know, being ready to axe it, and then deciding to keep on with it. And I think what was exciting to me was that it didn't sound like anybody else I was reading. And I was, you know, I really wasn't that in touch with, I mean, I think I'd read some Lori Moore and some Pam Houston, that Cowboys Are My Weakness, which is was really kind of freeing for me. But I think what I liked, or what felt exciting to me, was that I was writing in a way that didn't feel like writing. I was and I sort of say this to my students also, like, I want, like, there's such a tendency in especially in beginning or emerging writers, where they try to sound like writing, which means using words they'd never use. And, you know, if you actually create the person that they create from those voices, like, you know, this, I don't know, the young woman who's written it is 25, and it's the voice of a 69-year-old man in an insurance firm. I mean, just in its formality. And I really liked, I think it felt really exciting to me to write in a way that didn't feel like that.
Like it was invented to tell a story.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
And you get at that voice that's telling
Yeah.
the story. Well, one of the things, I mean, several things actually in this workshop were extremely, you know, are going to stay with me for a while, and they kind of boosted me out of a place.
Good.
One thing that you said that was so wonderful was, and helpful to understand what critique is that you walk in there with knowing, if someone says something's wrong that you already sort of knew, listen to that. I think that I'm paraphrasing.
That was actually,
it,
you know, that's right.
that
When a professor of mine in graduate school said that the criticism that is the most helpful, I think she said the only criticism that's helpful, which I wouldn't stand by actually, is something said in class that you'd thought of beforehand, that you worried about, or you had a kind of inkling about. And I think that is right. I don't think you can import someone else's sensibility and revise based on what may be a perfectly good idea, but it's actually kind of, you know, importing something that won't grow naturally.
And another thing you said that was, I think, is very helpful for workshop is listen to what people liked, and you know what you said about, particularly in my case. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Don't listen to the. I mean,
I also just in general think that, and I don't know why I think this, but I in general think that writers benefit more by hearing what they do right, or what they do best. Because, you know, it's so easy to talk about what's wrong or what's weak, or it's just, and I don't know that people really learn from that. I'm just not convinced of it. I sort of like the idea that you become more and more yourself on paper, not your Melissa's voice, but become more uniquely you. And I think that that comes from a place of strength, and not a sort of being afraid of making mistakes or doing it wrong.
You're really digging very deep in what you're working with. You read two pieces that were coming from a vulnerable place, and I think a very honest place. Can you name where you're going?
Yeah, in a way, it kind of started from doing a story for the Moth, that storytelling organization. And I was telling a story that I had told before. I'd actually written a piece for the Washington Post about it. And I worked with a director who was really good at pulling the story out of me. The piece was about a period when I had cancer, and I was riding my bicycle home from radiation, from Columbia Presbyterian to Chelsea, and I got hit by a car. And I had really serious short-term neurological problems, and which is kind of often the result of some kind of brain injury, depression, and I'd sort of had a way that I'd always seen that. And the way I would have said it is that I had felt really pretty strong going through cancer treatment, and then I just felt blindsided by this, and I saw my life differently, and I felt blighted for the first time. And I'd been pretty strong, and so it was just a really hard thing. And Leah, the director, said, "Yeah, but you were stopping treatment anyway. I mean, if you had thought of yourself as a fighter this whole time, when you're finished with treatment, you're not fighting anymore." And I realized that I had sort of come up with this narrative that had worked for me, and it wasn't really completely the truth. And when I told that story at the Moth, I'm always really nervous before a reading, but I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel nervous telling that story, because I felt like this is my life. This is something that happened, and I felt in a certain way like I owned it. I didn't feel a lot of the sort of narcissistic tell me that I'm good enough stuff. But I would say this stuff is, these stories that I'm writing are the kind of stories you would tell somebody if you were falling in love or getting close to somebody. And they're sort of the stories that, sometimes for reasons you don't even understand, they're the stories that make you who you are. And it does feel vulnerable, and I guess I have talked about maybe not publishing them because I don't know whether I'm strong enough for it. I don't know. I get this feeling like I can sort of imagine the spirit of corrosive reviews, but I don't really know what they would say. And there's some part of me that is just, I don't want to sort of walk out into the playground with a kick me sign on my back, something like that. It feels more vulnerable than and maybe with time I won't feel that way. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much for sitting with me, and I'm happy that after all this time I've sat down with you and shared so much. So.
Yeah, thank you.